We continue now at the top of Daf Nun Beis Amud Aleph in Meseches Bava Kamma. This is Bava Kamma Daf 52a. The Gemara is continuing a statement of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. If a person sells a house to his friend, Kevan Shemasar Lo Mafteach Kana, once he gives him the key to the house, that creates the kinyan. The Gemara asks a similar question to what was asked in the previous Amud. Hey Chidami, what exactly is the case? I bechaspa likni bechaspa. If the kinyan is being made with kasef, with money, let him do a kinyan kasef. I bechazaka likni bechazaka. And if it's a kinyan chazaka, so then let him do a kinyan chazaka. What's this idea of giving over the key? And the Gemara answers along the same lines as before. Liolam bechazaka. Really, we are talking about a kinyan chazaka. Uboy lememar lech chazeko kani. But when you do a kinyan chazaka, the person has to say to the other person, "Go and make your kinyan chazaka and make your kinyan." V'kevan shemasar lo maftech. And once he gives him the key, command damar lech chazeko kani. Dami, that is similar to saying lech chazeko kani, and that's what the purpose of giving over the key is. And the Gemara continues, Amar Reish Lakish mishum Rabbi Yanai. Reish Lakish says in the name of Rabbi Yanai, Hamocher eder lechaver. If somebody sells a flock of sheep to his friend, Kevan shemasar lo mashchuchis kane. Once he gives him the mashchuchis, we'll see what that means. That's going to create the kinyan. Again, the Gemara asks, Hey Chidami, what exactly is the case? Ibe Meshicha, if we're talking about a kinyan Meshicha, Likni be Meshicha, just do the kinyan Meshicha. And Ibe Mesira, if we're talking about a kinyan Mesira, Meshicha means you pull the animal, you draw it close. Mesira means you give over the reins of the animal. So Ibe Mesira, if you're talking about a kinyan Mesira, Likni be Mesira, do a kinyan Mesira. And the Gemara says, Li'olam b'Meshicha, really we're talking about a kinyan Meshicha, you're pulling the animal. Uboy l'meimar le lech meshochu kani. And again, the person needs to say to the other person, go and do your kinyan Meshicha and make your kinyan. V'kevan demasar lo mashchuchis, and once he gives them the mashchuchis, command do amar le lech meshochu kani. Dami, that's the equivalent of saying lech meshochu kani. And the Gemara says, "My mashchuchis." What exactly is this mashchuchis? Hachatir gemu. Here they translate it as karkashta, which means like a bell that was used to move the flock of sheep. Rabbi Yaakov says, "Iza da'azla b'reish edra." There was a goat that would go at the front of the flock, and that was essentially like the leader, and that's the one that leads the flock. That's called the mashchuchis. Kededoresh hahukli law alei de Rav Chisda, like a certain Galilean darshan to Rav Chisda, kadrog is raya al ona avid lenagda samus. If the shepherd gets angry at the flock, so he makes that leading goat, he makes it blind. The idea is it's like a metaphor. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give bad leaders to Klal Yisrael if it's a time where Klal Yisrael is fit, that they should be punished. And Rashi explains, Mashchuchis lekami mefarish davar hamoshech kol ha'eder acharav. The Gemara will explain again that a mashchuchis is the thing that causes the flock to follow. And Rashi continues, Hey Chidami, what exactly is the case? Ibe Meshicha, if you're talking about a kinyan Meshicha on the sheep, Sheikisha b'makel v'rasa lefanov, that would be like hitting it with a staff and causing it to run in front of him. Shekein derech behemadaka, that's the way of doing the kinyan by behemadaka, by the smaller animals. So likni b'Meshicha, just do kinyan Meshicha. Lamali mesiras mashchuchis, what do you need to give over? The mashchuchis. Ibe Mesir, and if we're talking about giving over the reins, kanilu, if that's the kinyan, Shaya Rishas Harabim, Chatzer Sheina Shel Shneim, that would apply if it's in a Rishas Harabim or a Chatzer that doesn't belong to them. Shein Meshicha konesham, there Meshicha doesn't work. Dein Meshicha ela besimto b'chatzer shel shneim. The Meshicha only works if you're at an area that's not really a Rishos Harabim or a chatzer that's shared by them. B'hamocher asvina b'Baba Basra, that's taught in Baba Basra. Karkashta. So the first opinion of what mashchuchis is that it's a karkashta garsinan zug. It's like the bell. Shemekarkesh bolef ne'aeder. He uses the bell in front of the flock. V'holech kulo achrav. That's how they follow. Iza da'azla b'reish edra, or it's the goat that goes in the front. Yesh lebal ha'eder eis charif v'derech ha'izim lahalech barosh v'aeder holech achreim. They would have a certain leader type of goat that would go in the front and the animals would follow. Avid lenagda samus, and that's like the expression when the shepherd gets angry at the flock, so he makes the leader blind. La'ez hamosheches menaker eineh, he pokes out the eyes of that goat that's the leader. V'nechshelis v'nofelis beboros, and then so the goat's going to fall in a pit. V'aeder acharen, the flock will just follow. Kach keshahamakam nifra misona Yisrael, the same thing when HaKadosh Baruch Hu punishes the enemies of Israel. Mimana lehen parnasim she'enan mehuganim, so he appoints for them leaders that are not proper leaders. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Kiseyu harishon, let's say the first person covers up the pit, Uba hasheni umatzom magula, and then the second person comes and he finds that it's open, Velo chiseu, and he doesn't cover it up, Hasheni chayiv, then the second person is going to be chayiv. Kiso karoi, let's say a person covers it properly, V'nafal asocha shor chamor, and into the pit falls an ox or a donkey, V'meis, and it dies, Patri is patri in that case because he covered it properly. Lo chiso karoi, if he didn't cover it properly, V'nafal l'socha shor chamor v'meis chayiv, and then again an ox or donkey falls in and dies, then he's going to be chayiv. Nafal lefan of mikol hakriya. Let's say it falls forward. The Gemara will explain this exactly, but it falls forward because there's a sound coming from the pit, that there's digging going on in the pit. Chayiv in that case is chayiv la'achra, but if the animal falls backwards, mikol hakriya, from the sound of the digging, potter, so then the person is potter. Nafal l'socha shor v'kelav in ishtabru. Let's say an ox and its kalim, the vessels that are on it, they all fall in and they break. Or chamor v'kelav in iskaru. Let's say a chamor and its vessels tear. By a chamor, generally it would have a kind of a saddle that was cloth that could tear. So chayiv. So in that case, chayiv ala behemu, potter ala kalim. Be chayiv on the animal, but you're going to be potter on the kalim. Again, bor is chayiv on animals, but is potter on kalim. Nafal l'socha shor cheresh shota v'katan. If a shore that is deaf or an imbecile or a minor, meaning it's a shore that's not a wise shore, falls in, chayiv. In that case, chayiv. Ben o bas eved o amma. If a son or a daughter or a slave or a maidservant fall in all of those cases, potter. Again, that's the equivalent of a person falling in, where we say potter. And Rashi explains, Kiseu harishon, let's say the first person covers it, kishenishtamish bo, after he used it, uba hasheni lishtamish bo, then the second person comes and mitzvah maguli finds that it's not covered. Kigon sheisliya v'nishbar akisa. What happened was worms got in and they broke the covering. There's no cover. So hasheni chayiv, the second one is chayiv, harishon potter. The first person is potter. Uvegamor mefarish ad mosai rishon potter. The Gemara will explain to what extent. When do we say that the first person is potter? Avaloki so harishon. Now let's say the first person didn't cover it. Uba hasheni mitzvah magula. And then the second person found it uncovered and he didn't cover it either. Shnei and chayav, and then they're both chayiv. With the katani hasheni chayiv, and when we say the second one only is chayiv, hokimna, that we already established is talking specifically shehini chorishon l'sheni mishtamish v'samach olav sheichasenu, that the first person essentially finds the second person using it, essentially transfers over the responsibility to take over, as we explained earlier. Kiso koroi, let's say he covers it properly, v'avar alav hashor o chamor v'nafal v'meis, and then again the shore, the chamor fall in there and die, potter is potter. V'gemar parch. Now the Gemara asks, hol v'charoyu hechi nafal. If he covered it properly, how did the animal fall in there? And Rashi continues, nafal lefan of mikol hakri. Again, if the animal fell forward because of the sound of the digging, bor karuya was already a dug pit, v'nichnas kora socher l'socho, and then a hired person comes to dig inside of it, laharchiv o lahamik, to widen it, to make it deeper. V'shor holech al svas habor, and then there's an ox that's walking by the edge of this pit, v'shama kol hapatish, the person hears the sound of the digging, v'nivas, and he's frightened, v'nafal al pana babor, and he falls on his face in the bor, chayiv bal habor, then the bal habor is chayiv. And Rashi explains, v'afilu shor shu pikeach. The point over here is, even if it is a wise shore, the amr lekaman, because we're going to say later on, v'masnisa, we say in the brisa that generally the bal habor potter, that when it's a wise shore, the owner of the bor is potter. The shore should have looked where it was going. But hacha, the point is over here, chayiv shekol hakriya bi'asa. So here he's chayiv because it happened because of the sound of the digging, so he's responsible. And Rashi notes of a Gemara parach that the Gemara will ask, Nema Kora Garamle, let's say that it was the person digging that actually caused this to happen. Lishnachrin, another version, another way to understand the Mishnah, Lefan of Mikol Hakriya Balabor Chayev, again forward because of the sound of the digging, the Balabor is Chayev. Tiafagav the Ikolamemar Kora Garamle, even though you could say that the person digging caused it. For Kora Grama Bialmuhu David, and that's just a Grama that's indirect. The Kaimulan Hamavis as Chavero Pater Midinayadam, we've established the halach is if somebody frightens his friend, he's potter from dinei adam. Uvetarvayu lifter, and then everyone should really be potter. Afilu achino, nevertheless, bal habor chayiv, the owner of the pit, is still chayiv in this case. Rabbi Nosson, like Rabbi Nosson says, kidim afarsh b'gemara, as the Gemara will explain. V'zeh shamati, Rashi says, this is what I heard, is the explanation. Liachra mikol akriya potter, but if it falls backward from the sound of the kriya potter, kidim afarsh b'gemara, this also will be explained in the Gemara. V'aydi denaka bereisha mikol hakriya. Now, since in the beginning we talk about falling from the sound of the digging, Tana Seifa la'achra mikol hakriya. Therefore, we say in the Seifa also from the sound of the digging, but that's not really the point. The point is that it's li'acharav. Bechli shor shaycha shavira ha'olva ha'machresha. Rashi notes when it comes to the vessels that are attached to an ox, there we talk about breaking because we're talking about the yoke, etc. Bechli chamor shaycha kriya. But when we're talking about the vessels of a donkey, there we talk about tearing. Chavilas begadim umardas shalgabav, because there's the cloth that's upon it. Those things are kind of begadim. They're like garments that they tear. Upater ala kelim mefarish begemara. Again, there's a p'tur by bor when it comes to kelim, as the Gemara will explain. Shor chereshot v'katan begemara mefarish. The Gemara will explain what shor cher shor v'katan means. Ben o bas, and then it said at the end of the Mishnah, if it's a son or a daughter, kolomar afagav de katanim him. The point is, even though they're minors, you can't say they should have looked where they're going, to look where they're going. Nevertheless, there's an exemption from the Gzeres HaKasav. Shor v'lo adam, chamor v'lo kelim. It applies to shor, not a person, applies to chamor, and not to vessels. And the Gemara says, "V'rishon ad emas mifter." In the first case of the Mishnah, that first person, again, the case is he covers it up, and then it becomes uncovered, and then we say that the second person ends up being responsible and not the first. But until what point in time is that first person potter? At some point in time, he's aware he also shares in that pit. He should be responsible to cover it if he finds out it's uncovered. And the Gemara gives various explanations. Amar Rav says, "Bichdei sheyeda." In the amount of time that it takes to know that it became uncovered. We'll see Rashi in a moment. Shmuel Amar bichdei sheyodiyuhu. Shmuel says the amount of time that they can let him know, that others can let him know. Rabbi Yochanan says, "Bichdei sheyodiyu." It's the amount of time that they let him know. V'yiskor po'olim, and that he's able to hire workers. V'yichros harazim, and they cut down the cedar trees. V'yichasenu, and they're able to cover it up. And Rashi explains, "V'rishon ad emas mifter." Until when is the first person potter? Meaning, heichad debo hasheni v'nishtamish bo. That second person came along and he used it. V'lo chiso, and he didn't cover it up. Ad emas ramya kula chiyuv hasheni. Until when do we say that the entire responsibility is on the second person? V'rishon potter, and that first person is potter. And the first answer was bichdei sheyeda. Enough time that he knows. Meaning, sheyavo gam harishon acharechein. Meaning, if the first person actually then comes after the second person, v'yirenu megula, and sees that it's indeed uncovered, ho'elu shnei and yodin, since at that point they both know shehu megula, that it's uncovered, ram yechiyuv atarvayu, then they're both responsible. And Rashi continues, u'shmuel amar b'chtei sheyodiyu, and Shmuel says it's the amount of time that they let him know that it's uncovered. Ava b'shalo bavarao. The point is, even though he didn't come and actually see that it was uncovered, chayev b'chalko, he's chayev in his portion, in his share of the pit. V'lo ram yakula hasheni. It's not going to be all the responsibility of the second person. To halo gileya, because he didn't uncover it, then a chayev mishum poseach, that he should be chayiv for opening it up because he didn't open it. Lashon Mori, Rashi says that's the explanation of my Rebbe. Lashon Acher, another explanation of Shmuel, ad kidei shiodiyu, until they let him know, meaning afilu bavarao pater. According to the second explanation, even if he came and saw that it was uncovered, he's pater. Ad shiodiyu, unless they let him know about it. Velashon Rishon kasher, but Rashi says the first explanation is correct. And finally, the last answer was v'yichros harazim. It has to be enough time that he's able to hire workers and cut trees and cover it. But that second person who actually used it and saw it was uncovered and didn't cover, lo yahavin and shira kulihai, we don't give him that much time. Because he should have put some people there to watch the area to make sure no one fell in. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Kiso karoi v'nafal asocho shorach harmor umeis pater. If he covered it properly and an ox or donkey fell in there and died, so then he's pater again because he covered it properly. And the Gemara says, Kevan dechiso karoi hechi nafal. If he covered it properly, so how did the animal fall in there? And the Gemara answers, Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Chana. Rav Yitzchak bar Chana says, Shehisliya misocho. The case over here is that the worms got within it and they caused it to weaken. That's how this happened. And the Gemara says, Iboilu, they had the following question. Let's say you put a cover there that was strong enough to keep back an ox from falling in, but it's not strong enough for a camel. And then the camels come and they actually weaken the cover. And then oxen come and they fall in there. What's the halacha? And so the Gemara says, Amri, they analyzed it, they said as follows. Hechidami, well, what exactly is the case? If it's frequent that camels walk by here, so poshehu, so then he's negligent, of course he's responsible. And if it's an area where there's no camels, so anasu, that would be considered an onus, of course he's not responsible. And the Gemara says, lo no tzricha, the question is necessary in the following situation, tiasu leprakim, that they come sometimes. Mi amrinan kevan da'asin leprakim poshehu, do we say that since they come sometimes, that's negligence? The boile it should have occurred to him that this might happen. Maybe since right now they're not around, so therefore it's considered an onus. And the Gemara says, Tashma, come and hear a proof from our Mishnah. Kiso karoi v'nafal asocho shor chamor. It said again, if he covered it properly and the shor chamor fell in, umeis, and then the shor chamor died, pater is pater. So echidami, again, what's the case? Ilema karoi l'shvarim v'charoi l'gamalim. If he covered it properly for oxen and for camels, echinafal, how did the animal fall in? Elalav, rather than that, it's like our case. Karoi l'shvarim, it was fit, it was covered properly for oxen, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Nun Beis Amud Beis.